Imagine being alone in the middle of a raging storm, with the wind howling and the rain pouring down. Now, picture a young homeless boy, with nothing but the clothes on his back, risking his life to save an elderly man he's never met. What he finds out during this daring rescue will shock you. But before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss an inspiring story like this one. Charlie, a boy of merely 15 years, though his eyes held the weariness of someone far beyond his age. For 2 long years, the unforgiving streets of New York had been his home, each day a battle for survival. Tonight, as the first heavy droplets of rain began to fall, Charlie knew he faced his toughest challenge yet. The wind howled through the concrete canyons, carrying with it a bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into Charlie's very soul. He pulled his tattered jacket tighter around his thin frame, knowing full well it would do little to ward off the impending storm. His mind raced, searching for any memory of a safe haven, a forgotten nook where he might weather this tempest. As Charlie rounded a corner, the wind nearly knocked him off his feet. He stumbled, catching himself against the rough brick of a nearby building. It was then, through the curtain of rain that had begun to fall in earnest, that he saw him, an elderly man, frail and unsteady, struggling against the gale. Time seemed to slow as Charlie watched the old man falter, his legs buckling beneath him. In that moment, a war raged within Charlie's heart. Every instinct honed by years on the street screamed at him to seek shelter, to look out for himself as he always had. Yet something deeper, a flicker of compassion he thought long extinguished, compelled him forward. Before he could second-guess himself, Charlie found his feet carrying him towards the fallen figure. The rain lashed at his face, each droplet feeling like a tiny dagger against his skin. But he pressed on. As he drew closer, he could see the man's lips moving, forming silent words lost to the howling wind. "Hey, mister," Charlie shouted, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Are you okay?" The old man's eyes, clouded with confusion and fear, met Charlie's. In that gaze, Charlie saw a reflection of his own loneliness, his own struggle against a world that seemed determined to crush him. Without another thought, he shrugged off his jacket, his only real possession, and draped it over the shivering form before him. "We need to get you out of this storm," Charlie said, more to himself than to the old man. He looked around frantically, searching for any sign of shelter. Through the sheets of rain, he spotted a dilapidated building, its windows dark and uninviting, but it was their only hope. With strength born of desperation, Charlie hoisted the old man to his feet. The man was lighter than he expected, as if the years had slowly whittled away at his very substance. Together, they staggered through the tempest, each step a battle against the relentless wind and rain. As they approached the abandoned building, Charlie's heart raced. He had no idea what awaited them inside, but he knew it had to be better than facing the full fury of the storm. With one arm supporting the old man, he used the other to push against the weathered door. For a heart-stopping moment, it refused to budge. But then, with a groan of protesting hinges, it swung open. They stumbled inside, the sudden absence of wind and rain almost deafening. As Charlie's eyes adjusted to the gloom, he took in their surroundings. The building was as empty and forlorn inside as it had appeared from without, but it was dry, and for now, that was enough. Gently, he lowered the old man to the floor, propping him up against a wall. In the dim light filtering through grimy windows, Charlie could see the man's face clearly for the first time. Deep lines etched a map of hardship across his features. But there was something in the set of his jaw, the arch of his brow, that spoke of a life once lived with purpose and pride. "Thank you," the old man whispered, his voice barely audible. Thank you." As Charlie looked into those aged eyes, he felt something stir within him, a connection, tenuous but undeniable. Little did he know that this chance encounter, born in the heart of a raging storm, was about to change both their lives in ways he could never have imagined. With the storm still raging outside, Charlie began to search the abandoned building for anything that might help them through the night. As he moved deeper into the shadows, the old man's labored breathing echoing in his ears, Charlie couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the precipice of something momentous. In saving this stranger, he may have set in motion events that would ultimately lead to his own salvation. As Charlie ventured deeper into the abandoned building, his eyes gradually adjusted to the dim light. The storm outside continued its relentless assault, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling through unseen cracks. Despite the chaos outside, Charlie felt an odd sense of calm wash over him. For the first time in years, he had a purpose beyond mere survival. Rummaging through the detritus of the abandoned space, Charlie's hands closed around something promising, a stack of old newspapers and what felt like a book of matches. A small victory, but one that brought a faint smile to his weather-worn face. With these, he could at least attempt to bring some warmth to their makeshift shelter. Returning to the old man, Charlie found him slumped against the wall, his breathing shallow but steady. The man's eyes fluttered open as Charlie approached, a flicker of recognition passing across his weathered features. "I found some things to start a fire," Charlie said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "It's not much, but it should help keep us warm." The old man nodded weakly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "You're a good boy," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's your name, son?" Charlie hesitated for a moment. It had been so long since anyone had asked for his name, since anyone had cared enough to want to know. "Oh, Charlie," he finally replied, surprised by the catch in his voice. "My name is Charlie." "Charlie," the old man repeated, as if testing the name. I'm Mr. Hargrove. At least, I think I am." A look of confusion passed over his face, quickly replaced by a grimace of pain. Concern flooded through Charlie. He quickly set about creating a small fire, his hands shaking slightly as he struck a match. The flame caught on the edge of a newspaper, spreading slowly but steadily. Soon, a small fire was crackling, casting dancing shadows on the walls and providing a much-needed source of warmth. As the fire grew, Charlie turned his attention back to Mr. Hargrove. The old man's clothes were soaked through, his body still shivering despite the growing warmth. Without a second thought, Charlie began to help him out of his wet outer layers, draping them near the fire to dry. It was then that something fell from Mr. Hargrove's coat pocket, a crumpled photograph. Charlie picked it up, smoothing out the creases. In the flickering firelight, he could make out the image of a family, a younger version of Mr. Hargrove, a woman who must have been his wife, and a young boy with a mischievous grin. "Is this your family?" Charlie asked, holding the photo where Mr. Hargrove could see it. The old man's eyes widened, a mix of recognition and deep sorrow washing over his face. "Yes," he whispered, reaching out with a trembling hand to touch the photograph. "My wife, and my son, my boy." His voice trailed off, choked with emotion. Charlie felt a lump form in his throat. He knew all too well the pain of lost family, of severed connections. "What happened to them?" he asked gently, settling down beside Mr. Hargrove. The old man's gaze seemed to look beyond the photograph, beyond the room, into a past that only he could see. "I lost them," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "Not to death, but to my own foolishness. I was so focused on building my empire, on accumulating wealth, that I forgot what truly mattered." As Mr. Hargrove began to recount his tale, Charlie found himself drawn in, captivated by the story of a man who had everything and lost it all. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside their small sanctuary, a different kind of tempest was brewing. One of memories, regrets, and the faint stirring of hope. Little did Charlie know that as he listened to Mr. Hargrove's story, he was on the brink of a revelation that would shake the very foundations of his world. The connection he felt to this stranger was about to take on a whole new meaning, one that would forever change the course of both their lives. As Mr. Hargrove's tale unfolded, Charlie found himself transported to a world he had never known, a world of wealth, power, and privilege. The old man's words painted vivid pictures of boardrooms and mansions, of deals struck and fortunes made. Yet beneath the glittering surface of success, a darker current ran, one of neglect, loneliness, and a family slowly falling apart. "I was a fool," Mr. Hargrove said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was building a legacy for my son, but in reality, I was tearing down the only thing that truly mattered, our relationship." Charlie listened intently, his own memories of family stirring in the recesses of his mind. He remembered flashes of a life before the streets, a warm home, loving parents, the feeling of safety, but those memories were hazy, obscured by years of hardship and survival. Mr. Hargrove continued his story, recounting how his obsession with work had driven a wedge between him and his wife. "Sarah," he said, his voice softening at the mention of her name. "She was the heart of our family. She tried to warn me, tried to make me see what I was losing, but I was too blind, too stubborn to listen." As the old man spoke, Charlie found himself drawn closer, both physically and emotionally. The fire crackled between them, casting a warm glow that seemed to push back the darkness of the abandoned building and the storm raging outside. "It all came to a head one night," Mr. Hargrove continued, his eyes distant with remembrance. "I had missed my son's school play. Again. I promised I'd be there, but a last-minute deal came up. I thought I could make it up to him later, buy him something nice. But when I got home..." He paused, swallowing hard. Charlie found himself holding his breath, caught up in the story. The house was empty. Sarah had left a note. She'd taken our son and gone to her sister's, said she couldn't watch me destroy our family anymore. Mr. Hargrove's voice broke. "I thought it was just a scare tactic, that they'd be back in a few days, but days turned into weeks, weeks into months. By the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late." Charlie felt a lump forming in his throat. He thought of his own parents, of the circumstances that had led him to the streets. Had there been similar pain, similar regrets in his own family's story? Mr. Hargrove went on, describing how he'd thrown himself into his work even more after his family left, trying to fill the void with more money, more success. "But it was all meaningless," he said. "I had everything and nothing at the same time." As the night wore on, Mr. Hargrove's tale took more turns. He spoke of his efforts to find his family, of private investigators and desperate searches. "But it was as if they'd vanished into thin air," he said. "Or perhaps I was just too late. My son would be a man now, with a life of his own. Would he even want to know me after all this time?" Charlie found himself wondering about his own parents. Had they searched for him? Did they still think of him? The questions he'd pushed down for years bubbled to the surface, bringing with them a mix of longing and fear. As Mr. Hargrove's story progressed, he described how his empire had crumbled. Without his family to ground him, he'd made reckless decisions, taken unnecessary risks, "I lost everything," he said. "My company, my wealth, my home. But the truth is, I'd already lost everything that mattered long before that." The irony wasn't lost on Charlie. Here was a man who had once had everything he could only dream of, and yet he'd ended up alone and lost, just like Charlie himself. As the night deepened, Mr. Hargrove's words began to slur, his eyelids growing heavy. Charlie realized the old man was exhausted, the ordeal of the storm and the emotional toll of his story catching up with him. "You should rest," Charlie said gently, helping Mr. Hargrove into a more comfortable position. As the old man drifted off to sleep, Charlie sat back, his mind whirling with all he'd heard. He looked at the crumpled photograph still in his hand, studying the faces of the happy family. The boy in the picture would be about his age now, he realized. What had become of him? Did he ever think of the father he'd left behind? Charlie's gaze shifted to Mr. Hargrove's sleeping form. In the flickering firelight, the years seemed to melt away from the old man's face. For a moment, Charlie could see the successful businessman he'd once been, the father who'd lost his way. A strange feeling began to stir in Charlie's chest. It was more than sympathy, more than the connection he'd felt earlier. There was something about Mr. Hargrove's story, something about the man himself, that felt achingly familiar. As the storm continued to rage outside, Charlie found himself on the edge of a revelation. The pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know existed were slowly falling into place. His own fragmented memories, the odd sense of recognition he'd felt upon meeting Mr. Hargrove, the inexplicable pull that had made him risk his own safety to help a stranger. It all seemed to be pointing towards something big. With a jolt, Charlie realized he was trembling, not from cold or fear, but from the magnitude of what he was beginning to suspect. He looked again at the photograph, then at Mr. Hargrove, then back at the photo. The resemblance was there, subtle but undeniable. Could it be possible? After all these years, after all the twists and turns of fate, could he have stumbled upon the very thing he'd given up hoping for long ago? As the first light of dawn began to seep through the grimy windows, Charlie sat vigil by the dying fire, his mind racing. He knew that when Mr. Hargrove awoke, nothing would ever be the same again. For better or worse, the storm had brought them together, and now they stood on the brink of a discovery that would change both their lives forever. The boy from the streets and the fallen businessman, two lost souls brought together by chance, or perhaps by something more. As Charlie watched the sleeping form of Mr. Hargrove, he felt a mix of anticipation and fear. What would the morning bring? And more importantly, was he ready for the truth that awaited them both? As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the grimy windows, Charlie found himself in a state of nervous anticipation. The storm outside had finally subsided, leaving behind an eerie calm that seemed to mirror the quiet turmoil within him. He hadn't slept a wink, his mind too busy piecing together the fragments of his past with the story Mr. Hargrove had shared. The old man still slept, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. In the pale morning light, Charlie could see the years etched into Mr. Hargrove's face more clearly. The deep lines around his eyes, the furrows in his brow, the gray hair that had once been dark and full. Yet there was something in the set of his jaw, the shape of his nose, that Charlie found hauntingly familiar. As he waited for Mr. Hargrove to wake, Charlie's thoughts drifted back to his own past. He tried to recall the faces of his parents, but the memories were hazy, obscured by the fog of time and hardship. He remembered a warm smile, a gentle hand, the feeling of safety. But the details were frustratingly out of reach. How had he ended up on the streets? The question that had plagued him for years now took on a new urgency. He'd always assumed his parents had abandoned him, or that some tragedy had torn them apart. But what if there was more to the story? What if, like Mr. Hargrove's son, he had been the one who left? The possibility made Charlie's head spin. He'd spent so long building walls around his heart, protecting himself from the pain of abandonment. The thought that he might have been the one to walk away. It was almost too much to bear. As the morning wore on, Charlie found himself studying Mr. Hargrove's face with increasing intensity. He tried to imagine what the old man might have looked like years ago, in his prime. Would he have resembled the man in Charlie's faded memories? The crumpled photograph lay between them, a tangible link to the past. Charlie picked it up again, smoothing out the creases with trembling fingers. The happy family in the image seemed to mock him, a reminder of everything he'd lost, or perhaps everything he'd forgotten. Just as the silence was becoming unbearable, Mr. Hargrove began to stir. Charlie's heart leapt into his throat. This was it, the moment of truth. Whatever happened next would change everything. Mr. Hargrove's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his gaze for a moment before recognition set in. "Charlie," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "You're still here." Charlie nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He helped Mr. Hargrove sit up, acutely aware of every point of contact between them. Did the old man feel it too? This inexplicable connection. "The storm," Mr. Hargrove said, looking around. "It's over." "Yes," Charlie replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It passed during the night." Mr. Hargrove nodded, then his eyes fell on the photograph in Charlie's hands. A look of pain flashed across his face. "I was dreaming of them," he said softly. "My wife, my son. It felt so real." Charlie swallowed hard. It was now or never. "Mr. Hargrove," he began, his voice shaking slightly. I need to ask you something." The old man looked at him, curiosity and concern mingling in his gaze. "Of course, my boy. What is it?" Charlie took a deep breath. "Your son," he said. "What was his name?" Mr. Hargrove's brow furrowed. "His name," he repeated. It was Charles. We called him Charlie." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Charlie felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. He'd suspected, he'd hoped, but to hear it confirmed. "Charlie." Mr. Hargrove's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right? You've gone pale." Charlie couldn't speak. His mind was reeling, memories flooding back in a dizzying rush. A big house, a busy father, a mother's tears, a decision made in anger and hurt, years on the streets, trying to forget, trying to survive. I think, Charlie stammered, his voice barely audible. "I think I might be your son." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of years lost and the possibility of a future reclaimed. Mr. Hargrove stared at Charlie, his eyes wide with shock and dawning recognition. "It can't be," he whispered, reaching out a trembling hand to touch Charlie's face. "My boy? My Charlie?" As Mr. Hargrove's fingers brushed his cheek, Charlie felt something inside him break. Tears he'd held back for years spilled over, and he found himself enveloped in the old man's embrace. "I'm sorry," Charlie sobbed, the words muffled against Mr. Hargrove's shoulder. "I'm so sorry I left." "No, my boy," Mr. Hargrove said, his own voice choked with emotion. "I'm the one who should be sorry. I drove you away. Can you ever forgive me?" As father and son clung to each other, years of pain and loneliness began to melt away. Outside, the city was coming to life. The storm, nothing but a memory. But inside the abandoned building, a new storm was brewing, one of reconciliation, forgiveness, and the tentative hope of a future together. Charlie pulled back, wiping his eyes. "What happens now?" he asked, suddenly feeling very young and unsure. Mr. Hargrove smiled, a smile that transformed his entire face. "Now, my boy," he said, "we start over. Together." As the morning sun streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow over the room, Charlie felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead would not be easy. There were years of hurt to overcome, trust to rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, Charlie felt hope. The storm that had brought them together had done more than just provide shelter. It had washed away the barriers between them, clearing the path for a new beginning. As Charlie helped his father to his feet, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The boy from the streets and the fallen businessman had found each other against all odds, and in doing so, they had found something even more precious, a second chance at being a family. As Charlie helped Mr. Hargrove to his feet, a wave of dizziness washed over the older man. Charlie quickly steadied him, concern etching his features. "But are you all right?" he asked, his voice tinged with worry. Mr. Hargrove nodded weakly. "Just a bit lightheaded," he said. "It's been a while since I've had a proper meal or rest." The words hit Charlie like a punch to the gut. He'd been so caught up in the emotional whirlwind of their reunion that he'd momentarily forgotten the dire circumstances that had brought them together. His father, the thought still felt strange, was clearly in need of medical attention. "We need to get you to a hospital," Charlie said firmly. "You're not well." Mr. Hargrove started to protest, but Charlie cut him off. "No arguments. We've lost too much time already. I'm not losing you again." The determination in Charlie's voice seemed to surprise Mr. Hargrove. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not the little boy he'd left behind, but a young man who'd been forced to grow up too fast. Pride and sorrow warred in his heart. "All right," Mr. Hargrove conceded. "But what about you? Where will you go?" Charlie hesitated. He hadn't thought that far ahead. The streets had been his home for so long. The idea of anything else seemed almost foreign. But looking at his father's concerned face, he knew he couldn't go back to that life. Not now. "I'll come with you," he said, the words feeling right as soon as they left his mouth. If that's okay." Mr. Hargrove's eyes welled with tears. "More than okay," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's all I've ever wanted." Together, they made their way out of the abandoned building and into the bustling streets of New York. The city seemed different to Charlie now, full of possibility rather than danger. As they walked, Mr. Hargrove leaning heavily on Charlie for support, they began to talk, really talk, for the first time in years. Mr. Hargrove spoke of his life after losing his family, of the spiral of depression and reckless decisions that had cost him everything. Charlie, in turn, shared snippets of his life on the streets, the daily struggle for survival, the loneliness, the moments of kindness from unexpected sources that had kept him going. As they neared the hospital, Mr. Hargrove suddenly stopped. "Charlie," he said, his voice serious, "I need you to know something. I have nothing left, no money, no home, nothing to offer you except my love and my sincere desire to make things right. Are you sure you want to tie yourself to a broken-down old man?" Charlie felt a lump form in his throat. He thought of all the nights he'd spent huddled in alleyways, dreaming of a warm bed and a family to call his own. He thought of the years of anger and hurt, of the walls he'd built around his heart. And then he thought of the inexplicable pull that had made him risk everything to save a stranger in a storm. "Dad," he said, the word feeling strange yet right on his tongue. "I've spent years having nothing. But last night, in that abandoned building, I had something I haven't had in a long time. Hope. You gave me that. And that's worth more than any amount of money or possessions." Mr. Hargrove's eyes filled with tears once more. Without a word, he pulled Charlie into a tight embrace, right there on the busy New York street. For a moment, the world around them faded away, and they were just a father and son, reunited against all odds. As they entered the hospital, both Charlie and Mr. Hargrove knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There were years of hurt to overcome, trust to rebuild, and practical matters to sort out. But they also knew that they would face these challenges together. The next few days passed in a blur of medical tests, social workers, and long conversations. Mr. Hargrove was diagnosed with exhaustion and malnutrition, but with proper care and rest, the doctors were optimistic about his recovery. Charlie, for his part, found himself navigating a world he'd long since left behind, a world of paperwork, official documents, and systems designed to help people like him. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration, of doubt, of old hurts resurfacing. But there were also moments of joy, of laughter, of rediscovering the bond that had been broken so long ago. 1 week after their fateful encounter in the storm, Charlie and Mr. Hargrove, or Robert, as Charlie was slowly getting used to calling him, stood outside the hospital, facing an uncertain future. "Where do we go from here?" Charlie asked, the enormity of their situation suddenly hitting him. Robert smiled, a glimmer of his old confidence shining through. "We start over," he said. "Together. I may not have my old resources, but I still have my skills, my knowledge. We'll find a way, Charlie. I promise you that." As they walked down the street, no particular destination in mind, Charlie felt a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. He had a father, a family, a future. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with ups and downs, moments of doubt and moments of triumph. But as Charlie looked at his father, saw the determination and love in his eyes, he knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together. The storm that had brought them together had done more than just provide shelter. It had given them a second chance, a chance to heal, to forgive, to become the family they were always meant to be. As they walked side by side into their new life, Charlie realized that sometimes the fiercest storms can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. And he was ready, at last, to embrace whatever the future might hold. As Charlie and Robert walked side by side into their uncertain future, the bustling city of New York seemed to pulse with newfound energy. The streets that had once been a battlefield for Charlie's survival now held the promise of opportunity and redemption. Their first order of business was finding a place to stay. With Robert's financial resources depleted and Charlie's street savvy, they found themselves in a modest shelter that catered to families trying to get back on their feet. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start, a foundation upon which they could rebuild their lives and their relationship. The shelter was a far cry from the luxurious life Robert had once known, and for Charlie, it was a stark contrast to the harsh realities of the streets. Yet, there was a comfort in having a roof over their heads and each other's company. As they settled into their temporary home, both father and son found themselves on a steep learning curve. Robert, once a titan of industry, now had to navigate the complexities of social services, job applications, and the humbling experience of asking for help. His pride took a beating, but every time he felt like giving up, he'd look at Charlie and find the strength to persevere. This was his chance to be the father he should have been all those years ago, and he was determined not to squander it. Charlie, for his part, struggled with the transition from street life to a more structured existence. Simple things like regular mealtimes, curfews, and the expectation of attending school were foreign concepts after years of fending for himself. There were nights when the walls of the shelter felt suffocating, and the urge to run back to the familiar streets was almost overwhelming. But in those moments of doubt and difficulty, they found solace in each other. Late-night conversations became their ritual, a time to share fears, dreams, and the painful memories that still lingered between them. Slowly but surely, the walls of mistrust and hurt began to crumble, replaced by a growing understanding and affection. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, their bond grew stronger. Robert threw himself into job hunting with the same fervor he had once applied to building his empire. His years of experience and business acumen hadn't disappeared, but he found himself starting from the bottom once again. He took on odd jobs, anything from data entry to night security, determined to provide for his son and prove that he had changed. Charlie, encouraged by his father's perseverance, decided to give education another shot. He enrolled in a GED program, tackling years of missed schooling with a determination that surprised even himself. There were moments of frustration and self-doubt, times when the academic challenges seemed insurmountable. But Robert was always there, offering encouragement, helping with homework, and reminding Charlie of his potential. Their journey wasn't without its setbacks. Old habits died hard, and there were heated arguments that threatened to undo their fragile reconciliation. Charlie's trust issues, born from years of abandonment and survival, would flare up unexpectedly. Robert's workaholic tendencies, deeply ingrained from his previous life, sometimes resurfaced, causing Charlie to fear that history was repeating itself. But with each conflict, they learned to communicate better, to understand each other's triggers and fears. They weren't just rebuilding their relationship, they were redefining it, creating something new and stronger than what they had lost. As the seasons changed, so did their circumstances. Robert's networking skills and relentless job searching finally paid off when he landed a position as a business consultant for a small startup. It wasn't the high-powered executive role he once held, but it was a chance to use his skills and start rebuilding his career. With a steady income, they were able to move out of the shelter and into a small, one-bedroom apartment. It was cramped and in a less-than-ideal neighborhood, but to Charlie and Robert, it was a palace. The day they moved in, they stood in the center of their tiny living room, looking at each other with a mixture of disbelief and joy. They had done it. They had a home. Charlie's academic efforts bore fruit as well. He not only obtained his GED, but did so with flying colors, igniting a passion for learning he never knew he possessed. With Robert's encouragement, he began to consider college, a dream that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. As they settled into their new life, both Charlie and Robert found themselves reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. The storm that had reunited them seemed like a lifetime ago, yet its impact continued to shape their lives in profound ways. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape of their apartment, watching the sun set over the city skyline, Robert turned to his son. "Charlie," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've overcome so much, shown such strength and resilience. I'm honored to be your father." Charlie felt a warmth spread through his chest at his father's words. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad," he replied. "You gave me a reason to hope again, to believe in second chances." As they sat there, father and son, the city bustling below them, they both knew that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges to face, more obstacles to overcome. But they would face them together, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured. The storm that had brought them together had done more than reunite a lost father and son. It had sparked a chain of events that led to personal growth, redemption, and the forging of a relationship stronger than either of them could have imagined. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Charlie and Robert looked to the future with hope and determination. They had weathered the fiercest storm of their lives and emerged stronger for it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else since that fateful night. Together. The city below them pulsed with life and possibility, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to overcome even the most daunting obstacles. For Charlie and Robert, it was more than just a city. It was the backdrop to their ongoing story of redemption, reconciliation, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. Robert's job at the startup began to flourish. His years of experience, combined with the humility he'd gained through his hardships, made him an invaluable asset to the young company. He worked long hours, but unlike in his past life, he always made time for Charlie. Their nightly dinners became a sacred ritual, a time to share the day's events and strengthen their bond. Charlie, inspired by his success with the GED, threw himself into his studies with renewed vigor. He enrolled in community college, tackling a full course load while working part-time at a local bookstore. The work was challenging, but Charlie found himself thriving in the academic environment. His unique life experiences gave him a perspective that his classmates and professors found fascinating, and he quickly became known for his insightful contributions to class discussions. However, their new life wasn't without its struggles. The shadows of their past still loomed large, manifesting in unexpected ways. Charlie sometimes woke in the night, drenched in sweat, his mind trapped in memories of cold streets and empty stomachs. In those moments, Robert would sit with him, offering silent comfort until the panic subsided. Robert, too, had his demons to face. The pressure to provide, to make up for lost time, sometimes threatened to overwhelm him. There were nights when Charlie would find his father hunched over his laptop, working well into the early hours of the morning, echoes of his old workaholic tendencies resurfacing. But with each challenge, they grew stronger, learning to lean on each other and communicate openly about their fears and insecurities. They attended therapy sessions together, both individually and as a family, working through years of hurt and misunderstanding. As months turned into years, their lives continued to evolve. Robert's work at the startup paid off when the company was acquired by a larger corporation. He was offered a senior position, complete with a substantial salary increase. The day he received the offer, he rushed home to share the news with Charlie, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "We did it, son," he said, pulling Charlie into a tight embrace. "We really did it." Charlie, now in his second year of college and thriving, felt a surge of joy for his father. "You did it, Dad," he corrected. "You never gave up." With their improved financial situation, they were able to move to a better apartment in a nicer neighborhood. The day they moved in, they stood in their new living room, marveling at how far they'd come from that stormy night in the abandoned building. But success brought its own set of challenges. As Robert's career flourished once again, Charlie found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. He was proud of his father, but a small part of him feared that history might repeat itself. Would success once again drive a wedge between them? These fears came to a head one evening when Robert missed one of their nightly dinners due to a late meeting. Charlie, triggered by memories of his childhood, retreated into himself, old defense mechanisms kicking in. When Robert finally came home, he found Charlie sitting in the dark, a packed bag at his feet. The sight stopped Robert cold, a chill running down his spine as he realized how close they were to losing everything they'd built. "Charlie," he said softly, his voice breaking, "talk to me, son." And talk they did. For hours, they laid bare their fears and insecurities. Charlie confessed his terror of being abandoned again, while Robert shared his own fear of failing as a father for a second time. It was a painful conversation, but a necessary one, bringing to light the unspoken anxieties that had been simmering beneath the surface. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, father and son reached a new understanding. Robert vowed to always prioritize their relationship, no matter what success came his way. Charlie, in turn, promised to trust in their bond and communicate his fears rather than running from them. This conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. They emerged from it stronger, with a deeper appreciation for the fragility of their connection and a renewed commitment to nurturing it. As time passed, their lives settled into a new rhythm. Robert found a balance between his career and his role as a father, while Charlie continued to excel in his studies. They even began to give back to the community that had supported them in their darkest hours, volunteering at the shelter that had once been their temporary home. On the 5th anniversary of the storm that had brought them together, Charlie and Robert stood once again on their fire escape, looking out over the city. The skyline had changed, new buildings rising where old ones had stood, a fitting metaphor for their own journey of renewal and growth. "You know, Dad," Charlie said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I used to think that storm was the worst night of my life. But now I realize it was the best thing that ever happened to us." Robert nodded, putting an arm around his son's shoulders. "It gave us a second chance," he agreed, "and I thank God every day for that." As they stood there, father and son, they both knew that their journey was far from over. Life would continue to throw challenges their way, but they faced the future with confidence, secure in the knowledge that whatever storms might come, they would weather them together. The city below them continued its endless rhythm, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to overcome even the most daunting obstacles. For Charlie and Robert, it was more than just a city. It was the stage upon which their ongoing story of redemption, reconciliation, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son would continue to unfold. As the sun set on another day, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Charlie and Robert looked to the future with hope and determination. They had come so far from that stormy night, but in many ways, their journey was just beginning. Whatever life had in store for them, they would face it as they had faced everything else since fate had brought them back together, side by side, father and son, bound by a love that had weathered the fiercest of storms and emerged stronger for it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Charlie and Robert's conversation on the fire escape continued well into the night. They reminisced about their journey, marveling at how far they'd come and dreaming about what the future might hold. Charlie, now in his final year of college, was on the cusp of a new chapter in his life. His experiences had shaped him into a compassionate and driven young man, and he'd discovered a passion for social work. He wanted to help other young people who, like him, had faced seemingly insurmountable odds. "I've been thinking, Dad," Charlie said, his voice filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I want to start a program for homeless youth, something that can give them the kind of second chance we got." Robert listened intently, pride swelling in his chest. The boy who had once been lost to the streets was now determined to be a beacon of hope for others. "That's a wonderful idea, son," he said. "Tell me more about it." As Charlie outlined his vision, Robert's mind began to race with possibilities. His business acumen, combined with Charlie's first-hand experience and passion, could make this dream a reality. "You know," Robert said thoughtfully, "I think I might be able to help with that." Over the next few months, father and son threw themselves into bringing Charlie's vision to life. Robert leveraged his business connections to secure funding and support. while Charlie worked tirelessly to develop a comprehensive program that would address the complex needs of homeless youth. They faced numerous challenges along the way: bureaucratic red tape, skeptical investors, and the sheer magnitude of the problem sometimes felt overwhelming. There were nights when Charlie doubted himself, wondering if he was in over his head. In those moments, Robert was there, offering encouragement and practical advice. "Remember, son," Robert would say, "every great endeavor starts with a single step. We've overcome worse odds than this." As Charlie's graduation approached, their project, which they had named Second Storm, in honor of the night that had changed their lives, was beginning to take shape. They had secured a building, assembled a team of dedicated professionals, and were on the verge of launching their pilot program. The night before the launch, Charlie and Robert once again found themselves on their fire escape, their special place for reflection and heart-to-heart talks. The city stretched out before them, a glittering tapestry of lights and possibilities. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Robert asked, noticing the tension in Charlie's shoulders. Charlie nodded, a rueful smile on his face. "Terrified," he admitted. "What if we fail? What if we can't help these kids the way we want to?" Robert placed a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "Charlie, look at me," he said gently. "Do you remember where we were just a few years ago? You were living on these very streets, and I had lost everything. But we found each other, and together we built a new life. That's what you're offering these kids, a chance. And that chance is everything." Charlie felt a lump form in his throat, overwhelmed by the truth in his father's words. "Thanks, Dad," he whispered. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." The next morning, as they stood outside the newly renovated building that would house Second Storm, Charlie felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The street kids who would be part of their pilot program were due to arrive any minute. As the first group of teens shuffled in, their faces a mixture of wariness and hope, Charlie felt a surge of determination. He saw himself in their eyes, the fear, the distrust, but also the flicker of possibility. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it. Over the next year, Second Storm faced its share of ups and downs. There were breakthroughs that brought tears of joy to Charlie's eyes, like when a young girl who hadn't spoken in months finally opened up during a group session. There were also setbacks that tested their resolve, like when one of their most promising participants relapsed and disappeared back onto the streets. Through it all, Charlie and Robert stood strong, supporting each other and the young lives they were trying to change. Their bond, forged in their own storm of adversity, became the foundation upon which they built hope for others. As Second Storm grew and evolved, so did Charlie and Robert's relationship. They were no longer just father and son, but partners in a shared mission. Their dinner conversations now revolved around program strategies and success stories, their shared passion giving their relationship new depth and dimension. Robert, once driven solely by the pursuit of wealth and status, found a new purpose in supporting Charlie's vision. He used his business skills to ensure Second Storm's financial stability and expansion, finding more fulfillment in this work than he ever had in his previous career. Charlie, for his part, blossomed into a respected leader in the field of youth outreach. His unique perspective as someone who had lived on both sides of the street gave him an authenticity that resonated with the kids they were trying to help. As Second Storm celebrated its 5th anniversary, Charlie and Robert stood side by side at the podium, addressing a room full of supporters, staff, and program graduates. The journey hadn't been easy, but as they looked out at the faces of the young people whose lives they had touched, they knew it had been worth every struggle. 5 years ago, Charlie began, his voice steady and confident. I was just a kid with a dream, inspired by my own second chance. Today, thanks to the unwavering support of my father and the dedication of our incredible team, we've been able to offer that same chance to hundreds of young people. Robert stepped up, placing a proud hand on Charlie's shoulder. "And we're just getting started," he added, his eyes shining with emotion. "Every storm, no matter how fierce, eventually passes." In the face of life's fiercest storms, they had not only survived but thrived, and in doing so, they had become a beacon of light for others caught in their own tempests. As they left the stage, arm in arm, both Charlie and Robert knew that their greatest adventure was still unfolding. The story that had begun in a storm was far from over. It would continue to evolve, touching more lives and weathering new challenges. But whatever the future held, they would face it as they had faced everything else since that fateful night. Together, bound by a love that had been tested by the fiercest of storms and emerged stronger for it. The city outside pulsed with life and possibility, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to overcome even the most daunting obstacles. For Charlie and Robert, it was more than just a city. It was the backdrop to their ongoing story of redemption, reconciliation, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. A story that would continue to inspire and change lives for years to come. As the years passed, the story of Charlie and Robert's journey continued to unfold, touching lives far beyond the borders of New York City. Second Storm, once a fledgling program born from a shared dream, had blossomed into a nationwide initiative, with branches in major cities across the country. The success of their program had not gone unnoticed. Charlie, now in his early 30s, had become a respected figure in the field of youth outreach and social work. His TED Talk, Weathering the Storm, Rebuilding Lives and Families, had gone viral, inspiring countless others to take action in their own communities. Robert, for his part, had fully embraced his role as the business mind behind their expanding organization. His years of experience in the corporate world, combined with the humility and compassion he'd gained through his own struggles, made him uniquely suited to navigate the complex world of nonprofit management and fundraising. One crisp autumn morning, as Charlie and Robert sat in their shared office overlooking the city, they received news that would once again change the course of their lives. Second Storm had been nominated for a prestigious international humanitarian award. "Can you believe it, Dad?" Charlie said, his voice filled with awe as he read the email. "They want us to speak at the United Nations." Robert leaned back in his chair, a proud smile spreading across his face. "I can believe it, son. You've worked hard for this. We both have." As they prepared for their trip to Geneva, where the award ceremony would be held, both men found themselves reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. Charlie thought back to those dark days on the streets, when survival was his only goal. He remembered the hunger, the fear, the loneliness. But he also remembered the moment of grace that had reunited him with his father, setting in motion a chain of events that had led to this moment. Robert, too, was lost in memories. He thought of the man he used to be, driven by ambition, blind to the needs of his family. He remembered the crushing weight of loss and regret, and the miraculous second chance he'd been given that stormy night. The day of the ceremony arrived, and as they stood backstage waiting to be called, Charlie felt a familiar wave of nervousness wash over him. Robert, sensing his son's anxiety, placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Remember, Charlie," he said softly, "no matter what happens out there, I'm proud of you. We've already won the most important battle. We found each other again." Charlie nodded, drawing strength from his father's words and presence. As their names were called, they walked onto the stage together, united as they had been since that fateful night so many years ago. Their speech, a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of love and second chances, moved the audience to tears. They spoke of their own journey, of the countless lives they'd seen transformed through Second Storm, and of their vision for a world where no one would have to face life's storms alone. As they accepted the award, surrounded by a standing ovation, Charlie and Robert shared a look of understanding. This moment, as grand as it was just another step in their ongoing journey. In the days and weeks that followed, the impact of their recognition at the UN rippled out across the globe. Offers of partnerships and funding poured in, along with invitations to speak at conferences and universities worldwide. Charlie and Robert found themselves at a crossroads. The opportunity to expand their work on a global scale was tempting, but it also presented new challenges. How could they maintain the personal touch that had made Second Storm so effective while operating on such a large scale? As they had done so many times before, they retreated to their fire escape, their special place for important conversations. The city sprawled out before them, a reminder of where their journey had begun and how far they had come. "What do you think, Dad?" Charlie asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Should we go global?" Robert was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I think," he said slowly, "that we have an opportunity to help more people than we ever dreamed possible, but we need to be careful not to lose sight of what made Second Storm special in the first place." Charlie nodded, understanding his father's concerns. "Maybe we could create a mentorship program," he suggested. "Train others to do what we do, but in their own communities. That way, we can expand our reach without losing the personal connection." Robert's face lit up at the idea. "That's brilliant, Charlie. We could create a network of Second Storm centers, each tailored to the needs of its local community, but united by our core principles." As they continued to brainstorm, their excitement grew. They could see the potential for Second Storm to become not just a program, but a movement, a global community dedicated to helping people weather life's fiercest storms. Over the next few years, Charlie and Robert worked tirelessly to bring their vision to life. They traveled the world, sharing their story and training others to carry on their work. Second Storm centers began to spring up in cities across the globe, each one a beacon of hope for those facing seemingly insurmountable odds. But even as their work took them to far-flung corners of the world, Charlie and Robert never forgot where they came from. They made sure to spend time in New York, working directly with the youth in their original program, and maintaining the personal connections that had always been at the heart of their mission. As Second Storm's 10th anniversary approached, Charlie and Robert found themselves once again on their fire escape, reflecting on the incredible journey they had shared. "You know, Dad," Charlie said, his voice soft with emotion, "sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come. From that stormy night to this, it's like a dream." Robert nodded, his eyes misty with unshed tears. "It's been quite a ride, hasn't it? But you know what, Charlie? The best part of it all hasn't been the success or the recognition. It's been sharing it with you, watching you grow, seeing the man you've become. That's been the greatest gift of all." Charlie felt a lump form in his throat. "I couldn't have done any of it without you, Dad. You gave me more than just a second chance. You gave me a purpose, a mission." As they stood there, father and son, the city stretched out before them, a living, breathing reminder of where their journey had begun and how far they had come. But more than that, it was a symbol of the countless lives they had touched, the storms they had helped others weather. The story that had begun on that fateful stormy night was far from over. It had grown and evolved, touching lives across the globe. But at its heart, it remained a story of love, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son. As the sun set on another day, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Charlie and Robert looked to the future with hope and determination. They had weathered the fiercest of storms and emerged stronger for it, and now they were helping others do the same, one life at a time. The city below them continued its endless rhythm, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to overcome even the most daunting obstacles. For Charlie and Robert, it was more than just a city. It was the stage upon which their ongoing story of redemption, reconciliation, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son would continue to unfold, inspiring generations to come. As the years rolled on, the story of Charlie and Robert continued to inspire and evolve. The city that had once been the backdrop to their struggles now stood as a testament to their triumph. Second Storm had become a beacon of hope, not just in New York, but across the globe. On the eve of Second Storm's 20th anniversary, Charlie, now in his mid-40s, stood at the window of their organization's headquarters. The view was different now. The skyline had changed, new buildings rising where old ones once stood, but the spirit of the city remained the same, resilient, ever-changing, full of stories waiting to be told. Robert, his hair now more silver than gray, joined his son at the window. At 70, he had slowed down somewhat, but his eyes still sparkled with the same determination that had seen them through their darkest days. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Robert said, placing a hand on Charlie's shoulder. Charlie nodded, a smile playing on his lips. "Remember when our whole world was just a few blocks of this city?" Robert chuckled. "How could I forget? We've come a long way from that abandoned building." Indeed they had. Second Storm now operated in over 50 countries, with hundreds of centers helping millions of people rebuild their lives. But success hadn't changed the core of who they were or the bond they shared. As they prepared for the anniversary gala, Charlie and Robert found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The challenges they'd faced, the lives they'd touched, the storms they'd weathered together. The gala itself was a grand affair, attended by dignitaries, celebrities, and, most importantly, graduates of Second Storm programs from around the world. As Charlie took the stage to deliver the keynote address, he felt a familiar surge of emotion. 20 years ago, he began, his voice steady and strong, I was a lost boy, and my father was a broken man. We found each other in the middle of a storm, and together we found a way to turn our pain into purpose. As he spoke, Charlie's eyes found his father in the audience. Robert sat proudly in the front row, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Second Storm was born from our story, but it has grown beyond anything we could have imagined. It's no longer just about me and my dad. It's about all of you. Every person who's ever felt lost, alone, or hopeless. It's about the power of second chances and the strength we find when we weather life's storms together. The applause was thunderous, but for Charlie, the only approval that mattered was the proud smile on his father's face. As the years continued to pass, Charlie and Robert faced new challenges. Robert's health began to decline, and Charlie found himself taking on more of the day-to-day operations of Second Storm. But even as their roles shifted, their bond remained unbreakable. On Robert's 80th birthday, they once again found themselves on the fire escape of their old apartment building. They had kept the place all these years, a reminder of where their journey had begun. "You know, Charlie," Robert said, his voice softer now but still full of warmth, "I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately." Charlie turned to his father, concern etching his features. "Dad," Robert held up a hand, smiling. No, it's not like that. I'm not going anywhere just yet. But I want you to know something. When I was younger, I thought legacy was about buildings with my name on them, or a fortune to leave behind. But I was wrong." He paused, looking out over the city they both loved so much. "This, what we've built together, the lives we've touched, this is my true legacy, and it's all because of you, son." Charlie felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Dad, Robert pulled his son into a tight embrace. "I'm so proud of you, Charlie. So proud of the man you've become, of everything you've accomplished. You took our second chance and turned it into second chances for millions of others." As they stood there, father and son, the city stretched out before them, a living, breathing reminder of their journey. From the streets that had once been Charlie's home to the towering skyscrapers that now housed Second Storm offices, every inch of the city held a piece of their story. But their legacy extended far beyond New York. It lived in the hearts of every person they had helped, in every life touched by Second Storm. It was a legacy of love, of resilience, of the unbreakable bond between a father and son that had weathered the fiercest of storms and emerged stronger for it. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Charlie and Robert looked to the future with hope and gratitude. They had been given a second chance, and they had used it to change the world, one life at a time. The city below them continued its endless rhythm, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to overcome even the most daunting obstacles. For Charlie and Robert, it was more than just a city. It was the stage upon which their ongoing story of redemption, reconciliation, and the unbreakable bond between a father and son had unfolded. And as they stood there, arm in arm, they knew that their story would continue to inspire generations to come. For in the end, it wasn't just about weathering the storm. It was about what you built in its wake. And what Charlie and Robert had built was a legacy of hope, a testament to the enduring power of love and second chances. The story that had begun on that fateful stormy night so many years ago was far from over. It lived on in every person who found hope in their darkest hour, in every family reunited, in every life rebuilt. It was a story of love, of redemption, of the unbreakable bond between a father and son. A story that would continue to change lives for years to come. As night fell over the city, Charlie and Robert made their way back inside, their hearts full of gratitude for the journey they had shared and the lives they had touched. They knew that whatever storms the future might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else since fate had brought them back together, side by side, father and son, bound by a love that had been tested by the fiercest of storms and emerged stronger for it. And so, their story continued, a beacon of hope in a world that sometimes seemed full of darkness. For Charlie and Robert had learned, and taught others, that even in the midst of life's fiercest storms, there was always the possibility of a new beginning, a second chance, a brighter tomorrow.